Sir, I thank each one of the members who participated in this discussion on the Companies Law Amendment Bill. Just so that we don't lose sight of the larger picture, I'll start with the observation made by Senior Member Professor Saugata Roy in saying that in 2013 a very comprehensive bill was passed and it really made him and many others proud, and that was the Companies Act that we are constantly now amending. I'd like to benefit from the observations made by Sri Pinaki Mishra. 2013 Companies Amendment Act, which was obviously duly passed in this House, and I do not want to undermine the effort of this House in passing it. However, it is now more than well agreed, both outside and in this House, where I take again, I repeat, refuge in the words of Sri Pinaki Mishra. 2013 Companies Act. I'm not sure how it got passed, but it did get passed, but has thrown itself to repeated demands for amendments. So the amendments that we are bringing in, and in this government now for the first time, and earlier between 2014 and 19, two times, were not driven just by the treasury branches. Amendments were not the fancy of the government, whereas it was more driven by the stakeholders' demand. Companies, auditors, cost accountants, registrars, all of them having equally problem executing that act and also complying with that. And as a result, when a government is constantly being told that the act doesn't live up to the legislative intent, there is a need for us to respond and come up with amendment. So to comment that the act which was comprehensive passed in 2013, why would you want to do the amendments? I'm sorry, I will have to underline this point. Amendments are not just being brought in suo motu, but they are being brought in with because there's a demand and in response to attending to the people's inconveniences and addressing them. Of course, ease of doing business, which is very dear to this government, and we want to make sure that we attend to ease of doing business. We are attending to it not on norms which we've got for ourselves. Ease of doing business is more from the point of view of companies which are at the ground facing difficulties. And in this, not big companies alone. In fact, small and medium companies are the ones for whom several measures have been taken by this government, and therefore this set of amendments which are coming, both having amendments which have been passed through the ordinance and also amendments which are now being brought in addition to what had been passed through the ordinance, are all aimed at ease of doing business for small, medium and large companies as much as any other companies which are being troubled because of the Companies Act. So yes, credit goes to the government in 2013 who thought of having the Companies Act. But with all the committees, with all the considerations, the Act is found wanting, and therefore we are going ahead with the amendments with which we are coming. Now, different speakers have spoken on different aspects of it, and I do respect the concern as expressed by Member Sri Nishikant Dubey that we are cutting into the time of the private members' bill. So instead of going into the larger picture, which I would definitely want to give in great detail, and because the need is for me to contain my reply so that I don't encroach upon the private members, I would just respond to the questions which many of the members have raised. So it's not as if I'm reducing my job, but probably being pointed saves some time. Sri Adir Ranjan Chaudhary had raised a lot of questions, and first of all he started by saying, I dislike the approach of going through the ordinance, which was also repeated by Professor Saugata Roy. Exactly, I'm with you on it. We do not want ordinances. We certainly do not want to live with ordinances only. And this attempt to get it into a bill and with a sense of urgency, please appreciate, is only because the ordinance's life is getting over by the end of this month. And unless I get this through now through the legislation, we are just going to have to live with ordinances for which you'll hate me. I do not want the system of continuing with ordinances. Please consider passing this act because we want to legislate on it. So that is the first response. The shell company is something on which many members have spoken. What actually is the definition for, say, a shell company? Who becomes a shell company? Supriya ji, you referred to it also. It's not a fit of anybody's imagination which talks about shell companies. Yes, the expression shell company is not used in the law or in the rules, but what are the shell companies actually? And who are they? And why do we take pride in saying that we have actually brought down quite a few of shell companies? Nearly 4 lakh inactive companies have been deregistered by us. Nearly 4 lakh. And what does that mean? 4 lakh of companies which were totally inactive, not just for 1 or 2 years, but several years. And I would say probably even more than 5 years they've remained inactive. Now, the provision that we're bringing in through the amendment now, saying declaration before the commencement of business itself, is an attempt to restore something which was there before 2003, in the 2013 Kanun, but with 2015 for some odd reason it was removed, but we are restoring it. And together with non-maintenance of registers, non-maintenance of a registered office, all these put together may loosely be defined as shell companies. If you didn't have a proper registered office, if you didn't declare the business with which you wanted to commence your business, you become a shell company. And 4 lakh such companies in the last few years have really been identified and deregistered. So that on the shell company issue. Now, because we insist, and through the amendment we are saying, non-maintenance of a registered office shall be made one of the grounds, stated grounds, for striking off any company. So physical registration of a registered company's addresses will become now absolutely necessary, just so that you don't run the risk of being defined into a shell. CSR, again, is something on which many members were concerned. I'll take a few extra minutes on talking about the CSR. There was this question asked as to why CSR funds cannot be used locally. Supriya ji asked me that question. There's nothing which stops, by the rule, use of CSR fund for local requirements. The government, in fact, has nothing to do with it because it's all now very clearly stated. It is the company's board which takes a decision on it. And actually, if the way in which the funds have to be spent has been defined, have been very clearly stated, 11 or 12 such clauses under which they can use it, those are the ways in which companies can spend their CSR money. Broadly, which are the companies which can come under this question of CSR? They are the ones which have at least 5 crore of profits. They are the ones who have 1,000 crore of turnover, or those which have 500 crore net worth. Let me take this opportunity to say, India is probably the first country to make CSR a mandatory requirement by putting it into the company law itself. So that is something which we need to recognize. 2013 legislation itself talked about it. So yes, credit goes to you for having imagined that CSR will have to be into it. But the way in which it got defined had to be fine-tuned over and over again, and that is what we've done. Now what we are trying to suggest through the amendments is that if you have already started for a plan, prior to execution you started spending some preparatory expenditure on the CSR, very well, great, but you've not really started commencing the expenditure itself, never mind. You will be given a 3-year window, which is the first year in which you probably starts making a decision, but you started just only initially spending the money. The company will be given that 1 year plus 3 years in which they will have to steadily start spending the money, for which they have already said that they have decided to spend the money on some account, CSR, some particular project in which they want to spend the money. So within the 3 years, after that year in which the decision has been taken, you have to give us a picture of where the money has been spent. That is the 2% of your total turn. But in case it doesn't happen, you will have to move the money into an escrow account. If for the projects which are ongoing, you get this time period as a grace. But if you have not spent at all, if you have not really had a cost to talk about decisions on CSR, if you have not even identified the projects, if you have not even initiated the prior planning expenditure, within 6 months, the money should be put to a common account, which can be then spent on, like the way, was it Honorable Member Raja who suggested that it be spent through the Prime Minister's Relief Fund. Let that happen. We have, in fact, thought of it. Thank you for the suggestion. We have actually thought of it. If the companies have not thought of, if they have not even thought of starting to spend the money, let it go to the PM or anything for that matter, but it will go to a common account. If the company has started something, identified something, you are given a 1 plus 3 year window through which you can. Sorry? I'm not able to hear. Can any one of...
No, you said no PM, you should go to the PM fund. If they are not the same,
Sorry? No, it can go to a consolidated fund or some scheme under which some... all right, but there is a scheme of things under which the companies take a decision. So it has now got to be put into the account so that the company will apportion that amount for a common cause, and they can't sit and wait for continuously taking a decision, leaving us with an impression that the Companies Act, particularly the CSR related aspects, are interpreted as you have to comply or else you can just give an explanation. It's a regime where comply or explain. Do not comply, also explain. That's not the regime that the CSR Act of 2013 Companies Law has in mind. The intent of the Companies Act 2013 in talking about CSR was not do or don't, but give an explanation and get out of it. No. Just explanation doesn't do. You have to show it in your activity. If you have not spent it, put it into account from where it can be spent, or if you have started spending, show us within 1 plus 3 years that you've really gone through with the process of decision making and you started the spending. So we have come to at least specifying details of it rather than leaving company to say, well, it's only an explanation, I can give it at any time. Dhanyavad. I'll go over to this point of what is the reason, Sri Adir Ranjan Chaudhary asked, what is the reason for including private companies under Section 164 of the Act? It was a considered decision that non-compliance with the basic provisions of non-filing of financial statements and annual returns, and regarding non-payment of deposits and debentures, etc., should result into some kind of a disqualification for becoming directors in any kind of company, including private companies. That is for relevant 5 years. This was done so that we bring in good corporate practices and nothing more than that. Sri Raja mentioned about the fear that there could be a discretionary element because once the registrar or an individual is allowed to take a call, without let's say a matrix of the predetermined fines, it could lead to corrupt practices. Point well taken. But all actions taken by the registrar is expected to be, and it shall be, in pursuance of the rules through the MCA 21 system, after due process of law and giving adequate opportunity for the companies themselves and their directors to respond to the notices. So the discretionary element is actually gotten over by the fact that they have to do the three-stage process, and because of that, we do not expect that an individual or a direct ROC, the Registrar of Companies, would indulge in any kind of a personalized discretionary step. Shri Pinaki Mishra